Today, it's time we move on to a character that has existed in quite the roller coaster, and that is the Amazon. And while she's always had a strong build, what that build is has changed rather frequently over the different patch versions and the expansion. So today we're going to start with a slightly maligned bow tree, which got some decent boosts in 2.4, especially today's trio, Multishot, Guided Arrow, and my personal favorite, Strafe. Starting out though, we've got what is probably the most popular of the three, Multishot, a skill that does exactly what it says on the tin and shoots multiple arrows in a single shot, while only consuming a single arrow or bolt in the process. Prior to 2.4, Multishot had some issues with damage, but made up for it by sheer coverage. But with 2.4, you are now able to reach a fairly decent damage output with it, thanks to its new synergy with Guided Arrow. That said, it still has its perks and drawbacks, and a few interesting pieces of behavior to go along with it. Probably the most important one being that you do want to pay attention to your final level in it, if you plan on actively using it, that is, since the mana cost will continue to increase forever, but the limit on the number of arrows is 24, it's a hard cap, which is reached at level 23 for those of you who are curious. So you don't want to overdo it, especially since while every arrow can do damage, only the central 2 arrows will carry on strike abilities like Crushing Blow, Chance to Cast, Knockback, etc., regardless of how many arrows you have. As far as the playstyle with the skill, you want to consider where you're clicking as well, much like Necromancers do with Teeth, since this is a positional spread skill. Clicking close will cause the spread to be further apart, while clicking far away will cause them to cluster up much tighter, which has both pros and cons in both cases, since generally you're only going to get one arrow to hit due to the next delays on damage with the skill, though there are some fringe cases that can break this, you generally will not run into them. The last important aspect of the skill is probably addressing the damage penalty. It applies, like with many damage reduced by percent skills, to everything. This means cold length, leech, etc. are indeed affected, and poison gets some wonky shifts in its formula as well, though that's a big rabbit hole that really won't impact much of how you play. Moving on from that to a skill that has had a massive fall from grace after a double whammy of nerfs, we have Guided Arrow, a still handy, but really not as favorable single target skill. As far as how it behaves, it again does exactly what it says on the tin. It fires an arrow that is guided towards enemies. The nerfs it got over the years, though, include requiring a line of sight from the player to track a target, so no corner shots, as well as the removal of the skill's ability to pierce enemies, which, while an important change for PvP, just kind of made the skill mediocre for use against monsters. And while the skill is nowhere near as good as it was, it does have some fun quirks with simple stuff like reducing mana cost per level, eventually becoming free, and having significantly longer range than other arrow attacks because it's duration, and those are just nice to haves. Though it does also have a couple handy quirks that you can exploit, such as when you fire without a target selected, it will favor unique monsters over other minions, or when you do fire with a target selected, it will ignore enemies between it and the target, meaning you can snipe that gloam behind a wall of flares without much issue. Now, since it is auto-hit, it will also ignore defense and attack rating, but it can still be blocked, which is again more of a PvP thing in many situations, but is something to keep in mind against certain blocky enemies as well, even though there's only a few. With synergies added, the damage is now getting a little better, but it's still not high enough for me to often choose it over the final skill in the series, Strafe. This is because Strafe, despite not being auto-hit, has a few interesting quirks, such as being able to shoot multiple arrows at a single target if they're alone, because it has a minimum of volley, and it is able to do these shots at a bit higher speed than a normal cluster of guided arrows or multi-shots, because it has a more of a Zeal-like attack speed pattern, with a mix of quick and slow shots that average out much faster than normal attacks. And with 2.4, it also got some significant bumps with the removal of a damage penalty as well as the addition of attack rating boosts and synergy, making it much more viable, even though we likely still need to look at bow damage to really bring it up to the cost to performance ratio of other similarly leveled skills. Now, the way Strafe works is that you stand still and fire a series of arrows at as many enemies on screen as you can, up to the maximum number of arrows. Or if there's too few enemies on screen, you'll shoot at least your minimum number of arrows, which is a hidden value, but is basically skill level divided by 4 plus 2. This value caps out at 10 arrows at level 32, which is handy to know if you plan on using the skill against solitary bosses or enemies to mow them down quickly. That said, at certain speeds, only every other arrow will hit because there is a next delay on each attack. The reason Strafe is my favorite skill of the tree is because it falls into what I call right-click to win skills. With proper equipment, you can just wander the game pressing right-click randomly and get plenty of kills and drops, even if 90% of your attention is on that podcast, video, or whatever we'd call that what the fuck you're watching in the other tab. So, do you have a favorite bow skill? Do you run bow builds on any other classes than the Amazon? Mention it down below, and as always, keep gaming, have fun, and peace out. This has been Alzorath. Bye.